Hello, my goal now is to show you a really simple of using ChatGPT. I'm recording a video because this service, the ChatGPT, is very used and sometimes the service is not available and you cannot use it. So right now that is at night, it is easy to use the service because it is available. So my goal is to show you how you can use ChatGPT when you have a real challenge. For example, think about, for example, in COVID in our company, and think that we have grow more than now. Our current status, the scale up, is going up, and we on our team in engineering and in other teams of the company are bigger and bigger. So in engineering, we have decided that we need, in order to implement the back office, that we are going to create a specific team for that. So now I have the challenge to define how we are going to create this new team and the technologies that we are going to use, and create a proof of concept, a POC, that can be used to evaluate the proposal for the new team. So let's start talking with ChatGPT. And for example, let's start trying to get some recommendation about the team creation. So could you advise in the creation of an new team for the back office services in my scale up company? Let's try. This is pretty generic, this question. So normally ChatGPT always says, sure, certainly I can do that. So for example, it is talking about recruiting. That probably is the first step, when you're creating a new team. But you can take the engineers from other teams in the company. Like it's talking about determine the team size and structures, recruit the right people, provide the necessary resources for the team, establish communication channels, set clear goals, expectation for the team. So you can see that it's a pretty good first approach for building the team. Good, pretty generic recommendation, but you can start working from them. For example, imagine that we are not sure if you use, for example, Scrum or Canvas for the team. Is it better to use Kanban or Scrum for the team management? Normally, it will say that it is not a clear question with a clear answer in all cases. So probably it's going to provide us an open answer for this question. And let's see, it is thinking a bit about this question. But and the next step is once we have shown that when we have understand that we can use ChatGPT from this moment, that is for defining the team, building the team, defining the goals for the team, and so on. It's not just for example, for coding activities. You can use it, for example, for design and for probably most of the cognitive activities that we can do as human beings. Let's take a look to the answer. The choice between Canvas and Scrum for team management depends on the specific need of goals. Both, again, he gives a quick introduction to both methodologies. And with this information, for example, we can do a more sensible approach for deciding. And for example, if I need to justify why I'm going to use some of the methodologies in the team, I have here some arguments to start building my vision and my reasons for different decisions and for the design of the team. So now, for example, let's move on and let's talk about the possibilities of using technologies in the team. For example, in our case, in the back office, we have decided to use Retool for the front end and part of the back end of our back office. And we are providing the data to the Retool using APIs normally to interact with the backend. But imagine that we have a white paper and we can decide about the technologies, about the approach, and so on. We have just one requirement, is that the data that we are going to manage is, for example, in our current data store that mainly is MongoDB and PostgreSQL. So imagine that we are using Retool. So we need to focus in providing the APIs for management, the APIs for working with the back office and for interacting with the data we already have. Pretty close at what we are doing right now with Retool. So, for example, the current technologies we are using, for example, is TypeScript with Express and so on. So this is, for example, one of the areas where ChatGPT does a great job. For example, let's try to create a first proposal for the software architecture of our new backend for the back office. Could you provide a REST API project based on TypeScript and Express using an hexagonal architecture? This is a question that is pretty easy for it. And here you have an example from the scratch that you can mostly copy and paste the code is presenting, and you can use it for bootstrap in your project. And this is something that is very useful. For example, he is providing here the basics about, for example, creating the project, design dependencies, and so on, creating the configuration for TypeScript, and then creating the folder structures with the different code. For example, the entities in the entity in the models in the domain. You have the interfaces for the repositories, for the services. You have also in the infrastructure is creating, for example, an in-memory user repository, because we have not specified nothing about what is the API REST offering. So he's providing here some TypeScript sample classes for implementing the different aspects of our hexagonal architecture, and it's a great starting point for start working. Imagine that I say, okay, but here, for example, you can see the basics API for working with a repository that is creating, finding, deleting. So basically the crude APIs. So here, for example, he provides a sample for user service for creating a user, finding a user, but so it has put the focus on management of users. But for example, we need to manage also transactions paid with credit card. Could you support that in this REST API? Okay, and let's see, this is something more specific, and let's see what happens when we start asking for more focused needs. that is, in this case, is the transactions. So probably he's telling us that certainly it can do that. So you can see here that, for example, at some point the service stopped working because normally it has pretty high loads. You know that in the first week, 1 million users subscribed to ChatGPT, and in January, mostly after 1 month, 100 million users are using ChatGPT, and right now, who knows, maybe 500 million users or something like that, probably. And here we can see that he is, for example, providing us to using the Stripe dependency in the project, and he is suggesting us to creating a payment service with, for example, the charge operation for the transaction and so on, and probably and a controller for charging using the credit card. In our case, what we really need is to read the transaction in our database, not for charging and so on. That is something done in the payment domain that is pretty different from the Backoffice one. But you can see here that ChatGPT understands what you want to do, and if you start iterating, you can go deeper and deeper in the code, in the architecture, in the software architecture that you are creating, and so on. And the code that is proposing, you cannot just copy and paste it and everything is working. Normally you need to modify it. So you need that some developer with some experience with technologies takes all the output from ChatGPT and put all together to work. Because if not, probably this is not a black box that you deploy all these things and it just works. Okay, and one of the things that I really like, for example, imagine that, okay, we are using, that is, we did change your Reps API sub now, and for example, we need to regenerate response because he has stopped here for the answer, because, for example, you have pretty long answers, it is pretty expensive to create them. Okay, the next topic I want to share with you, that for me it was a wow effect, is that, for example, you can say, okay, could you convert the project to Go language? And imagine that we want to create a proof of concept using Go, because we are creating a new team in Kobe for the back office, and we have the freedom now to, for example, use other languages to test if with these languages we can be more productive or are more suitable for the needs, for example, for the back office. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to start getting the same project, the same POC in different languages. For example, you can do this with Go, and I can say, okay, it's going to provide us all the code that you need with Go. But we see the same for example, for Python. Will you provide a Python version? It is going also to provide us the architecture, the folders, and the basic technologies that we need to use with Python to implement this hexagonal architecture. And probably is going to select Flash for the web framework for implementing the REST API. So we have a great start point here for building a proof of concept pretty quick. For example, in some cases, pues ChatGPT fails that in this one. I can try to regenerate the response, trying to fix the error. And when you have, for example, this proof of concept, you have the code. And after that, for example, we can ask also ChatGPT to, for example, create the Docker container for deploying the application using Docker. Here, for example, he's proposing the Python implementation with Stripe. That I don't know what is Stripe but it's installing it for Node and for Python. It could probably is pretty useful. And also he's creating the service, the controller, and so on. I'm not sure, for example, if he's here using the hexagonal architecture or proposing us all the different folders for the project. But for example, you can start from scratch and asking for the Python project structure. And for example, one thing that I really like, for example, you can, hey, provide me the base script to create the project structure for the folders. And of course, ChatGPT provides you with this script. But for example, the Docker things, could you provide a Docker file to deploy the project? For example, and here, as we are talking about the Python version, he's proposing us the Docker file for Docker, and we can see that it is a normal Docker file from a Python project based on the version 3.9. Probably this is because the ChatGPT information it's a bit old. So but right now the 3.10 version is the right one. But for example, for this kind of details, you need to adjust what ChatGPT is proposing you. But here you have this one, and then ChatGPT also tell you about how to build the image and so on, and how to execute the image and start testing your application, deploying it with a Docker container. That is basically the way that we are going to deploy our services in Kobe, using the Kubernetes cluster and deploying containers. So this is pretty aligned with the workflow that we want to use in Kobe. And talking about the real deployment of this container, ChatGPT also, for example, can help us with this kind of deployments. For example, could you provide a Terraform code to deploy the service in the cloud? And as we were talking about the Docker, is creating the deployment Terraform code using Docker, because we were talking about Docker in the previous step. So ChatGPT understands that we want to use Docker for deploying it. So in this case, this is the simple code to deploy Docker Price API to, and this is the Elastic Beanstalk. I have not used this service in AWS, but here is creating the Terraform for deploying it. Imagine that I said, okay, I don't want to use this service from AWS. I want to use Kubernetes. Could you provide the Kubernetes version? And then, okay, he's providing us, in this case, he's providing the YAML file for Kubernetes to deploy it. So this is not really what we want, because ChatGPT has understood that we want the deployment file for Kubernetes like I have asked for it. But what really I want to know, what really I want to have is the Terraform version for deploying it in AWS. So for that, for example, could you provide the Kubernetes version for deploying in AWS? in this case is doing the same, but creating the file for specifically for AWS. Okay, so as you can see, we can interact with ChatGPT and we can cover all the different aspects of a software projects. For example, we can ask, for example, for a proposal for API, for example, versioning. Could you provide a strategy for API versioning? And here you have general principle about this kind of versioning. So ChatGPT at the end is a pretty good made to talk about everything about software development, about any other things. So I hope that with this video, I have shown the world full of this kind of tools. Thank you.